Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Espedia. I am the Communications Manager for Tykes&Teens, and I am here with our Executive Director, Jeff Shearer. And the reason that we are here today is to try and give some parents advice about how to talk to their kids about the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why. So before we get into the meat of that conversation, I'm going to let Jeff tell you guys a little bit about himself, what his background is.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Jeff Shearer. As you said, I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of Tykes&Teens. We've been serving children for a little over 21 years. And my background is I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I have a master's degree in social work from Florida State University. Early in my career, I worked in a residential facility for emotionally disturbed adolescents for 3 years. When I moved back to the Stewart area, I briefly provided case management services to the chronically mentally ill, so working with those that really are affected by mental illness. But the rest of my career, I've always worked with children, young children to adolescents, although adolescent boys probably is my biggest specialty. And our agency, Tykes&Teens, provides an array of services. So we do prevention services. We have therapists who specialize in domestic violence, sexual abuse, and for years, I oversaw all of those programs. So my interests are very diverse when it comes to mental health. I'm a major advocate of understanding behavior, changing systems so that we benefit children.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's talk while we wait for some people to join us. And if you have joined us, please, we'd love for you to comment that you're here. Let us know that you're with us so that we can see that you're here. And we want to encourage, as we go through this, that you are more than welcome to ask questions. If there are specific questions that you have that you would like Jeff to answer on the topic, we absolutely encourage you to ask those. So we're going to start with a little bit of a summary of 13 Reasons Why. And we're going to warn you, spoiler alert, because if you haven't seen it and are planning to watch it, we are definitely going to be spoiling it for you today. There's no way for us to really get to the meat of the conversation without talking about what happened. Oh, hi, Christina Kaiser. Nice to see you here. Thanks for joining us. All right, Jeff, so why don't you give us a little summary of this?
The entire 13 episodes. And basically, it is a story about a young lady who moves to a new community and struggles in her peers. Her parents are having some financial issues as well, and she ends up dying by suicide. And when she dies by suicide, she gives 13 tapes to one of her peers, and then it gets distributed to each of the dedicated tape, which she perceived was part of the factor that was related to why she chose to take her life. It is a very kind of dark series. Clearly, it's talking about a very dark topic. There is 2 rape scenes in the movie as well. There's some cyberbullying that goes on, so it is definitely not necessarily an adult topic, but definitely a topic that high school students experience, which I think for adults sometimes is difficult for us to perceive our kids in having to have those experiences, but they do. And that is, I will say that's one of the benefits of this series, is that it does highlight really our need to be able to connect to our kids, to ask those very difficult questions, even when really we don't want to know. So just on a personal basis, I have 2 boys that are 20 They have survived the 18 years, so they are both off at college. But so I have personal experience as well as my professional experience in dealing with very difficult topics.
Right, and it's interesting. I'm sort of on the flip side of that because I'm mom to 2 girls who are 10 and 12. So I'm just, we are just starting all of that. And a lot of my interest beyond my professional interest here with Tykes&Teens in this is I'm concerned about how to talk to my own 12-year-old about this. And I actually asked her if she had heard of the series, and her answer was, yes, I've watched the first 2 episodes. And I was a little taken aback, and I asked her if she would stop watching until I researched it a little more and decided whether or not I felt it was something that we could put together. So, and we're going to cover all of these things today. So kind of on that note, there's been a lot of controversy, obviously, and a lot of mental health experts seem to think that the series romanticizes or glorifies suicide. So maybe we'll start there, and I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Well, I will absolutely agree that there is an aspect of this series that does glorify suicide. And one of the things that we forget is that the adolescent brain is developing, right? And so sometimes they have a difficult time foreseeing about what's going to happen 10 years from now. And they don't necessarily understand the impact of some of the decisions that they make that are related to what's going to happen. And some kids also get a variety of choices that we have. And so yes, it does. So there's two aspects of that. One is that there's a vengeful component, right? That's why she's the is to act these kids. But what we as people on the side is that when we're dead, there is no impact, right? Because we don't see about the impact. We have no idea what's going to happen. And so that really is kind of a misnomer as far as what those impacts are going to be.
Right. I mean, that's one thing that concerns me looking at it, is that it felt a little bit like a suicide as revenge.
Yes.
And
that's my perception as well.
And and I wonder if 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds are really able to get that they really will not be around to reap these imaginary benefits of leaving these messages behind. That's troublesome.
When someone is experiencing a lot of hopelessness, it really restricts their thinking. Their focus really begins. They don't think about the options that you have when you're not in that sense of hopelessness.
Right.
So when I say it restricts, you think, okay, this is the answer that I have. This is what's going to solve my problem. And so although that factor was true, that was something that was portrayed in the movie, the factor of that vengeance is truly not a real factor. The other thing that very misleading, I think, as well, is the glorification of herself. So you often see in the movie, when you flash in hallways, her locker. So her locker is all flowered up. There's an area where they're basically paying homage to her. We have learned long ago that actually is not a helpful thing, because there is such a thing as a contagion effect that's associated with suicide. Right. So schools don't do that anymore. That does not happen. So if there's a belief that you will remember me, I will be in perpetuity because I engaged in this behavior, that's not going to happen.
Okay.
Actually, the media is very clear. That's why they don't publish
right.
and broadcast suicide. Probably a very interesting phenomenon that probably most people are not aware of, but there are about between 30 to 40,000 suicides that occur in our country each year. There are only about 15,000 homicides every year.
Wow.
So, my perception always is that homicides occur at a much greater rate, right? That's what we see on TV. But actually, it's twice as many people end their life by suicide than get it taken away because of murder.
Wow.
So it's a very distorted perception.
Right, absolutely.
And that's because the media chooses not to broadcast it, which is an appropriate thing to do.
Right, sure. So I just want to take a moment and say hi, because I see we have had a lot of people join us. So Ileana, Allison, Stephanie, thank you for joining us. I know there are some more of you here, so we appreciate you being here. So on that topic about that sort of contagion effect that can happen with suicide, I think that's one of the things that scares parents about talking about it. And I know that's one of the things that scares me about talking about it, because it's finding that balance of how much information is too much, and where do parents kind of draw that line, because I know especially with younger kids, 12 or 13, and I think the girl in the series is 13.
No, she's in 10th grade.
Oh, so she's older.
Probably 16 or
okay,
so. So that she moved to the school in 10th grade, but she actually didn't take her life until the beginning of her junior year.
Okay.
That's when that happened.
Okay. So, and this kind of ties into another question that I have for you about age appropriateness.
Okay.
Do you want to go there? Or
well, you had mentioned about the contagion effect.
Yes.
And so I did want to. So the reason why it's so important to talk to kids, just like it is to talk to them about sex or relationships, is there's a lot of misinformation about it.
Okay.
And so as adults, of course, we've got the experience, we've got the information, we have the capacity to Google to be able to discern the difference between this and reality. And as I said before, kids will restrict their thinking, or not kids, but people who are in that sense of hopelessness. We as adults are not in that place. And so we think of options that kids may not be able to do. So actually what research tells us is that, and just what we saw in this movie, is they actually allude to that they're going to kill themselves. But we don't take the opportunity to take the time to actually ask. And that's actually one of the very last tapes that she plays, is she actually goes to the guidance counselor. And I wouldn't say that she was explicit, but she was pretty clear where her sense of hopelessness was, and that that really the only option for her was to take her life. And the guidance counselor didn't take the bait. And that's why he was given the 13th tape.
Okay.
And but as you saw in the movie, and I think that there is some truth to this, is that as she walked out of his room, she had the microphone in her bag to see if he would follow her. Because what she's wanting is to be important, to be significant enough that I matter. Right. And that even though I told you, hey, it's okay, I'll manage, I have a solution to this already, that he would be able to read those cues and be able to chase after her, and he didn't.
Wow.
And so having a conversation with kids is basically telling them, sitting with kids, and I would say middle school, early high school kids, if they're going to watch it, I would strongly encourage parents to watch it with their kids. Because as you watch the series, you will have the opportunity to be able to look at what are the coping skills that are going on here. What were the other opportunities that she could have enhanced? What were the things that maybe the family system that, hey, I would be willing to listen if this is going on for you.
Right.
And by watching the series, you would be able to do that.
Okay. Great advice. So we had a couple of questions from some parents who were not going to be able to join us live, but wanted us to address a couple of things because they are going to watch the presentation later. It will be archived on our Facebook page so that people can watch it at any time. So we had a parent that that asked, I found out that my 13-year-old watched the whole series without my permission. I didn't know she was watching it. How do I approach conversation with her? And that is important because this is something we're dealing with. Our kids have phones, and I'm guilty. My 12-year-old has one, hence why she began watching it on her own. So what advice would you have for a parent in that situation who's a little taken aback? Do you think the best thing for them to do then is to go watch it themselves and then sit down and have a conversation?
Or you could ask your child if they'd be willing to watch it again with you. Okay. So again, I do think that especially at that age, there are so many things that are going on in the series. So I may have mentioned earlier on, there's sexual assault,
right.
There's voyeurism, there's cyberbullying. I mean, these are pretty significant events, and those are great dialogues to have right then and there.
Okay.
So it's not just about the suicide, which is, again, another opportunity. The movie ends with another character shooting themselves. They don't tell you whether he dies or not, but he does shoot himself. And so that's that part of that contagion effect that we were talking about. There is this expectation that, okay, if she found the solution, then maybe her solution is good for me as well. And that's why we do need to talk about it. We need to address it. There were, when you reflect back in the movie, there were signs as to the risk factors that he had that led to him making that choice.
So can you talk about some of those risk factors?
Well, so again, this is a spoiler alert, but so the young man that took his life was, he also was new to the area. So he moved at the very beginning of the movie. There are three characters, the lead girl who takes life, another girl who's in the area, and then a boy, father of these. And he wants their meeting at the Monet's, which is that cafe that they would and they had that FML slogan that was kind of their point. And again, what's really important is kids need to be connected. So, although as parents, it's a little bit whatever that was. So one of the things that you saw throughout the series is that he felt very guilty about not connecting because he was very good friends with her. And what happened was he began to be friends with the popular crowd and kind of disconnected from her. Stopped reaching out to her, stopped meeting with her. So he had some sense of responsibility there. There's a scene when he's cleaning up his room. So his father's a police officer. It's always yes sir, no sir. Orderliness is an important thing for the father. So you see him putting the things together in his room. Well, one of the signs that we know about people who take their life is that they clean things up so that it doesn't impact other people because they don't want to be a burden to other people, and he clearly was doing that. But the guilt you see episode after episode after episode, that he wanted to do something and he felt sorry that he didn't do anything. He continued to want to do something, but his peer group said, no, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And because he didn't have the family support, because he did not have the peer support, and again, that's when that restriction occurred. And it's like, okay, well, here's probably his particular character probably wouldn't have thought of the idea of suicide if he had not experienced it, but because he did, it's like, okay, so this is the option that I'm going to take.
Wow. It's heartbreaking, but I think it's important to mention too that I don't know how many of you are local here on the Treasure Coast that are watching. Oh, hi, Janice. Janice says they're watching from our ALTOS program, which is our alternative to out-of-school suspension program here in Stewart. So hi, Janice and ALTOS staff. But what I was going to say is that along those lines of, is this a conversation to have with your middle schoolers? Well, here in Port St. Lucie recently, there was a death by suicide of a 13-year-old girl quite recently. So I think it's important for parents to realize that if you think that it's something that your 12 and 13-year-olds don't know about, or that it's not happening in their peer group, that clearly is not the reality. So
yes. So, well, that kind of brings me to the risk factors and protective factors that were in this young lady's life. And so connections is a big part of we as humans that we strongly, strongly desire. And for adolescents in particular, the fact that their peers is very important. Okay. But I don't want to mention connections with their parents and how powerful of a role that is. Okay. So in movies, we'll see that parents are on the pharmacy store and they're under a lot of stress. And you often hear about the parents arguing about income, and eventually the girl quit at the movie theater in which she is very connected with the boy that works there, the one who actually you're following throughout the series. She quits that job to work at the pharmacy. So it's one of her last connections that she had, that she perceived to be a healthy connection. Right. Her parents, because of the things that they were involved with, so this is an intact family. And this kind of is an important thing that there's some reality to that. So just because you're an intact family doesn't mean that you're available for your kids, or they perceive that you're available. They were dealing with basic needs, right? If they don't have enough money to pay the mortgage, there's a scene in the movie about that they are negotiating with the landlord in order to be able to keep the store open because they just don't have the money for it. And those are basic needs. I don't question those parents at all because of where their focus was. Right. But because of these other risk factors, because she was new to the area, because she was struggled with the conflict with some of her peers and having a very difficult time connecting, she didn't have resources to achieve and really brings it because she was a victim of sexual assault. Right. And I think because she did not feel like she had the resources, she did not tell. And it was one of the things that was really kind of the tipping point. She was kind of entertaining the idea prior to that event, but that was one of her tipping points to say, okay, this clearly is the solution. And that's actually when she started making the tapes, was after that incident. Okay, wow.
So we have a few more comments here that I just wanted to mention. Rudy Jeff and Lauren, you guys are doing a great job in presenting this material in a clear and kind fashion. Hi from Jupiter. My friend Nancy, who is on here, is in Long Island, New York. Wow, so nice to see people from all over. And thank you, Rudy. We appreciate that. This is our first time doing a Facebook Live presentation, and we do plan on making it a regular occurrence, a monthly occurrence to start with. And on that note, you guys can feel free to reach out to us on our Facebook page if there are other topics, mental health topics, or topics about children that you would like to see us address in the future. So I think we have a question here from Christina. Christina says, do you think there's any danger in assigning responsibility to a suicide? Too many people, especially girls, already stay in bad, unhealthy relationships. And as the mother of 4 young women, I worry, and I think there's more to it that may pop up in a minute. But that's an interesting question. Do you think there's danger in assigning responsibility to a suicide? And I think that's one of the things that a lot of mental health experts seem to have issues with.
Right, and that's the whole idea of the 13 tapes, right? Is that he basically is assigning, hey, I made this choice because of the things that you did to me.
Right.
So not taking responsibility for own actions. And that actually is not in very unhealthy relationships. We see that if you don't expire, I'm going to kill myself.
Right.
They hold it basically emotional hostage over the people connected with them. There's a lot of other factors that are related to that, and yes, I guess I'm not really clear about what the question is, because for whatever reason we can't see it, but
I'm wondering, I know we can't see the rest of it for some reason, but I am wondering if where Christina was going with that, because she mentions too many people, especially girls, already stay in unhealthy relationships, and I don't know if this is exactly where you were going, but I'm wondering if, especially for teenagers who are maybe in a romantic relationship with someone, and you know those feelings are incredibly intense, and that's sort of a new experience for
first
teenagers.
time in love,
Yep.
yes.
And so, have you seen instances in your practice where kids become suicidal over the loss of a friend or girlfriend, or assign an incredible amount of emotional baggage to the situation?
So it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about that restricted thinking. Right? The first time that I've been in love, then it may be the only time that I'm in love.
Right.
And because it's the only experience that I've had, then I don't think I can ever immensely feel this way again. And so as far as holding responsibility, clearly the only person who is responsible for taking their life is the person who's doing it.
Right.
But we also need to recognize that there are signs and symptoms, because it would be nice and to be able to do whatever we can to be able to prevent that from happening.
Right.
We're not responsible. We're never responsible.
Right.
Well, I shouldn't say never, because I know recently I saw a girl who was convicted of encouraging or telling her boyfriend to kill himself.
Right.
And he did, and she actually was held accountable to that from a legal perspective. But that's a little bit different, and that is very, very atypical.
Right.
It is more of this, and actually one of the things we see with boys, because we know that boys actually die by suicide at a much, much higher rate than girls do, about 4 times the rate. I know in our community, the last 20 years, I probably can think of 2 girls who have died by suicide and probably 20 boys.
Wow.
So we had 2 years died by suicide from middle school all the way up to the 3 year in high school. It was a very diverse group of people. Those that were had plans to go off to college to versus those that had goals, everything in between. And so there is no patterns of what someone looks like. Where they come from, everyone, what the socioeconomic status they are, everyone is there is that potential there. And so if we want to do something about it, it is those connections that really matter. To go out, if we feel like it, to go and act.
Right.
And if the other thing that I remember in that scene with the guidance counselor, she alluded to the sexual assault, and he interrupted her and said, "Did you make a choice that you didn't mean to?" He implied that she was responsible, that she was intoxicated, which she was not, and that she was responsible for the assault. And although there are situations where people put themselves at risk, a victim is never responsible for being sexually assaulted.
Right.
We talk about I may leave my door open to my house, but it does not give the right for a burglar to come in to be able to rob me.
Right.
So those are things that, we set barriers, but ultimately it is the offender's responsibility to the choices they make.
Right. So I see, just because I see a couple more questions and I want to get to them before they kind of disappear off of and I know Rudy, you had a question, I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but I see that Stephanie, because it's kind of what we're talking about right now, is asking, please tell us what signs to look for. And I assume Stephanie's saying what signs that your child might be suicidal. So can you talk a little bit about some very specific signs?
It's a great question. We might have wanted to start that way.
Right.
So the biggest signs is when there's a change in routine. So if I've got a kid who academically has always done well and they're no longer doing well, if they were participating in extracurricular activities and they're no longer participating, even if you don't have someone who's such an extrovert, but they would watch TV with the family and now is always in their room. So isolation is a big characteristic.
Okay.
One of the other, they actually will say, research shows us that kids actually talk about suicide before they do it. And really what they're saying is hey, this is one of my options here. Help me understand, is this the only option I have? And that's why talking about it is so important. Sometimes we see a change in appetite. So they're eating more or eating less. We'll see change in sleeping habits. So they're sleeping for hours and hours and hours, or they're up all night long. Sometimes kids will engage in drugs and alcohol, and this really is for adults as well, because actually there's a strong, one of the major risk factors that we see someone has a drug and alcohol issue. They actually utilize the what is prohibiting them from doing it. They will become intoxicated so that they can actually make the choice, because they're so scared to do it.
Right.
So they will inhibit their feelings with drugs and alcohol to be able to do that.
Okay.
Previous history of suicide, previous family history of suicide as well, because basically there's a message that this is a solution. This is an acceptable solution in my family.
Right.
So those are really kind of things to be aware of. But it's really, the biggest thing is when you see a dramatic change in a kid.
Okay.
When they stop talking about the future, they talk about, where I'm going to go to college. They're not going to talk about the football game that's going to happen next Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we see in kids and adults, is all of a sudden someone who's struggling, all of a sudden they have like, and it's because they've gotten the solution. They figure out, okay, this is how I'm going to manage it now. And they put this in order. So they give things away. They talk about meaningful things to people that I've been meaning to tell you that I want you to. It's because they want them to know before they take their life.
Right. So, and on that note, obviously, maybe we can talk a little bit about what a parent needs to do in that situation if they fear, maybe not even that suicidal ideation is necessarily happening, but maybe depression, other mental health issues. They want to seek out a professional. You can, call Tykes&Teens, and that number is 772-220-3439 while I'm thinking about it, in case you know anybody that might need to reach out for counseling for their child. We have a few more questions, and I do want to address everybody's questions. One that I know Rudy asked a few minutes ago, that I did want to address, and it goes back to age appropriateness. And I think he said he has a 7-year-old grandson. Obviously, that would be a little young to start having a discussion about these issues, but how young is too young, and when is sort of an appropriate time to engage in a discussion?
So how young is too young? Really, it really needs to be thought of in another way, is if the kid is bringing it up, then they're old enough to be able to handle it. Okay. So they've heard about it, it's meaningful to them, that's why they're bringing it up. It is not likely that a 7-year-old is going to hear this and it's going to have any meaning to him. Right. The characters are all in high school. These situations that are not typical of a 7-year-old. However, that being said, you can who has this and goes and seeks it out. I mean, it's on Netflix, right? So Netflix is known for having a wide variety of choices there. They're not, the parental controls I don't think are very good there, because really most of the stuff that's on there is not terribly inappropriate.
Right.
This topic is a very difficult thing. So it's not, even though some of the things that happen are explicit, it's not gratuitous. And so, so my point of that is that kids may be able to access that.
Okay.
We wouldn't necessarily know to filter those kinds of things out. And so, but if a kid is bringing it up to you, they are definitely old enough.
Okay. And if they're not bringing it up, but it's just something that you feel like they've probably heard about, they know about it. So say in my daughter's situation, so say a 12-year-old, 6th grader, do you think it's important if they haven't brought it up to open that discussion? Or if they're not bringing it up, is it better to wait?
No, I do think that it would be, if they're in middle school, then that probably would be my line, is I probably would lay the bait out there.
Right.
And if they don't take it, then it's not an issue.
Okay.
If they take it, then you can have the deeper conversation.
Okay,
And,
great.
As you are aware, we actually had Jay Asher come down. We collaborated with Moms for Mental Health. And Jay Asher, who is the writer of this book, it actually started off as a book before it became a series, and it was very clear that his intent was to have a dialogue about suicide. It is still one of those topics that are hidden. We don't want to talk about it. People are afraid of that contagion effect, even though that's not what a contagion effect means with that population. And so we do have this great opportunity, despite some of the negative aspects of this movie, or the series, to be able to have these dialogues with our kids. It matters.
Yes, and I would say, for all of the controversy and concerns about the romanticizing of suicide, and they're very valid concerns, and I think it's important, obviously, we address those with our kids and watching this. I do think it's important that, that we realize at the end of the day, we're not putting our heads in the sand as a community anymore, and that's a good thing, because look at how many people are talking about suicide now, and it needs to be talked about. And I think that's important to say. As Jeff said, we had Jay Asher here. He was wonderful, and I would imagine this is probably pretty difficult for him, so much controversy going on, and that, I think it's probably very hard to control the way that Hollywood, the direction that they go in, with a series like this. And so I just kind of wanted to mention that in no way do we think that Jay Asher's intent was to romanticize or glorify suicide, because we don't think that at all. And again, I think that it really is a positive thing, just that we are having these conversations. Janice had an important question, so before I forget, I wanted to address that. There were 2 questions here, and they kind of go together. What should teens take away from this to help their friends who may be feeling depressed? And how would you advise teens to respond if they feel their friend is suicidal? Great question.
So I'm going to answer this really bigger perspective, because what we need to understand is that it was a solution for her, but some of the other characters in the movie are also dealing with some very difficult things, and their solutions were different than hers. So we had a young lady who had a party at her house, and she was intoxicated, and she ended up being raped. And although she was not clear about exactly what was going on, and there's some dynamics as to why she didn't necessarily know why other people didn't tell her, she still had this impending thing. And the way she coped was she drank. She drank excessively. She drank at school. And so we need to recognize we have a tendency in our society to judge people, shame people when they engage in risky behaviors. But what we need to understand is that really was her way to cope. The boy who got the tapes there at the end, there was a period of time where he actually was being vengeful. Right? He wrote on a kid's car, he took a picture and then shared it with other people. That was a coping strategy. He felt like he needed to get even for her. Now, he recognized it didn't work, which is why he stopped, but that was a coping mechanism. There was the other boy who felt very guilty, and he kept saying to his crowd, we need to tell authorities, we need to let people know. And although he was so conflicted, we understand that the outing of this, which is what he didn't want to do, that's where that conflict was, a coping strategy. The boy at the very end, where his mother did not support him, the boyfriend attempted to kill him, he's the one who didn't tell his girlfriend that she had been raped. He lost his best friend because he actually was the one who did the rape. He lost everything. His way that he chose to cope was to run away. So we need to understand that not all, but many behaviors are means to be able to cope with difficult things that were going on. And that's what suicide is.
And so that behavior has meaning.
That behavior has meaning. And so if you have someone who overtly says, hey, I'm struggling, I am contemplating suicide, we need to understand that it's not about this moment in time, but it's about a big picture. There are other things going on, and yes, we want to be supportive, but we also want to get that professional involved because there may be some dynamics that are going on that just a connection is not going to be with. We do know there's biological factors that are associated with depression. I'm not an advocate of medication, but there is appropriate time and place when someone is profoundly affected by it. There's a chemical in the brain called dopamine.
Right.
When there's not enough of that being produced or stays in the brain, it causes depression. Thyroid problems also causes depression and lethargy. And so to make sure that we've ruled out the medical issues that are associated with this affective response and the way that we view the world, and if we need to address it medically, we can address it medically, but then we can also address whatever those traumatic histories may be going on as well.
Okay, great information. So back a little bit to Janice's, which you kind of touched on, like you said, from a bigger perspective, but do you have some concrete suggestions that you would make to a teen if they feel like one of their friends is severely depressed or possibly suicidal? What would you recommend they do in that situation?
You can't do it alone. So as much as we want to be the protector or the savior of our friends, you can't do it alone. So you may want to be the lead, right? But you want to bring the cavalier in as well.
Okay.
So tell parents, tell the guidance counselor, tell a teacher, but get other resources available for this kid because you don't want to get over your head. And there are other factors that are associated with people with more life experiences, know how to navigate,
right,
and that we want their support to be able to do it. But be friends.
Right.
Don't shame them. Don't belittle them. Don't say that they're faking or they're lying or encourage them to do it.
Right.
That it does have meaning.
Okay. So that your support of them is very important, but that can't be all it is. You've got to bring this to someone else.
That is correct.
To help.
Because it only takes one time, right? If I
right.
put the gun to my head, then I can't come back from that.
Right.
And one of the things sometimes we say is this too will pass.
Right.
But when you're in that very deep, dark place, you don't think that it can.
Right. Right. Okay, so I think we have a couple more questions here, so we want to address those. Christina says, explicit, not gratuitous. I think that's a really good point. Thank you. That makes me feel much better. 2 of my kids have seen it and love it, but I've been hesitant with regard to my 2 younger ones. So that is a good point. One thing I wanted to mention, and we don't have to go into this deeply, but in talking about those risk factors and unhealthy behaviors, I think it's kind of important to mention prevention even at sort of a ground level. And I always think of, asset building and those assets, and you can talk maybe just a little bit about this, that those assets for healthy children who may not be experiencing any depression or any of that yet, or maybe not ever, but can you talk just a little bit about asset building and what those important assets are for kids to have?
So the premise behind asset building is that when you feel good, you make good choices, and when we feel bad, we make bad choices. And that when we make bad choices, we continue to feel bad, and then we continue to make bad choices. Right. So when we're in kind of that negative space, that we need to recognize what are our assets. So there's a great study that's out there about developmental assets, and there are 40 of them that they identify. There are 20 internal ones, so it's the way that we perceive the world, and there are 20 external ones. Those are things that you actually can do. So those would be things like enjoying to read, participating in a youth group, participating in a sports activity, playing a musical instrument. Those are all external things, right? Those are observable things that you can see. Internal ones is I feel safe at school. I feel safe with my parents. I have particular beliefs that people can't necessarily shift for me. And so those are things, the internal ones is something that we can do in context of a relationship. And so by having those kind of dialogue of, so what does that mean to you? And what can I do to support you to get there? Such as feeling safe. What is it that you need to be safe in this family? And safety is a very personal perspective. We deal a lot with blended families, people coming in and out of the house. And so those, if I've got other experiences, those may be influences. And so but those external assets are ones that we can provide as well. That's our music lessons, right? Getting involved in soccer, right. Encourage them to be involved in drama at school. There are all those are other kind of external assets that we can provide. So Google it. I would encourage you to know more
because I
about
think
it.
the idea behind it is that the more of those assets that your child has, the less likely they are to engage in unhealthy behaviors.
That's correct. Like I said, feel good. You
do good, right? So kind of a simple thing, but I agree with that.
They're isolating themselves. They're getting into that more restrictive place.
Right.
And so we want to encourage them to see that there are other opportunities. Even the character in the movie, she goes to a poetry writing group, right? She's taking the risk to go out. And it actually becomes a very positive thing. What happens was that she was connected with at school, what she feels exposes her. Now, his worldview was that he was so proud of the world, he could see it. But she couldn't hear it that way.
Right.
And she ended up cutting off that group again. And as she was mailing off these 12, 13 tapes, she ran into the leader of this poetry group. She didn't realize the impact that she was having, the positive impact that she was having on other people. And that's what that restrictive worldview does, is that we can see all the assets that a kid has. But the kid, when they're in that restrictive place, they can't.
And I think from a parent's perspective, again, I go back to my generation of children, preteens and teenagers. They tend to isolate themselves a little bit more because of technology already, I think. So I think it can be harder for us now, for parents now, to really see when that isolation is taking place, because if your kid's already spending a lot of time in their room on their phone, I just think we have to be extra vigilant now to really pay attention to that.
Yeah. So one of the things that they showed in the movie as far as an asset is the boy who has the tapes at the time, the lead that you saw. The mom recognized that and she recognized that they weren't having dinner together. So what she chose to do was to have breakfast every single morning. And so research shows us that when kids have 5 meals a week with their parents, that they feel more connected. Again, that reduces those risk factors, and that explicitly is what they were showing in that scene. So the mom made pancakes. The first time it was this big thing, but as the weeks go by, the dad's like, "Oh, I'll make you breakfast," and it was a bowl of cereal.
Right.
It's not about the meal.
Right.
It's about the time together.
And that's so important. And Family Day, which is an initiative that we do here at Tykes&Teens every September. We do Family Day, which is just that. It is encouraging parents to share meals together as a family. And if you Google that as well, you will be amazed at the statistics about how that affects, how sharing meals together as a family affects a child's academic performance, reduces their likelihood to try alcohol and drugs. I mean, it's really amazing. So I think, again, there are little things you can take away from this. And if that's one of them, because if you're as busy as we all are and you're not doing that, I would really encourage you to make that one small change. Again, if it's a bowl of cereal, if it's a microwave dinner, I won't judge you. A frozen pizza happens a lot in our household, but the fact that we sit down together. And there are also, on that note too, you can Google, there's some great conversation starters. Google conversation starters. They're almost like little games that you can play around the table at dinner with your kids to get them talking, and those are great. So I wanted to see, I'm just going to glance at my notes here, because I mentioned we had some people that sent in some questions. I think actually that we kind of covered those questions. I don't see any new questions that have popped up. I'm sorry if I missed any. Again, this is our first time doing this, so hopefully we'll get better at it as we do more. But if you have any questions we haven't answered, now would be the time to send us those questions, and we'll try to address them before we wrap up. Jeff, is there anything important that you feel like we haven't touched on, or anything that you want to kind of close out with?
Well, so I guess the way I want to close out is that if you're going to sit down with your child to watch it, make sure that you're amplifying those positive attributes that occurred in those family systems, and that you are there to be there for your child when things get difficult.
Great advice. We may have a couple of okay, Tina asks, how do you protect children from suicidal cyberbullying? That's actually a great question, and we didn't talk too much about that. So we do see, and I believe the series explores cyberbullying a little bit, and we hear about that a lot in news too. That's a question.
Future topic?
Yeah, you know what? Because honestly, that probably is a topic that could spend an entire 30 minutes on.
So I know that in my practice, I've seen it's difficult for parents to understand because they're like, just turn it off.
Mm.
But the problem is that kids know that people are talking about it, and they feel like it's better to know than not to know. And it's a complicated topic, and so again, I think that's a great future topic.
I love, actually, thank you, Tina, for bringing that up, because maybe we will have that as our next topic. So, and hi, Stacy. Stacy is just saying that schools should be part of this, and I agree. You know, I have several friends, they don't live locally, but that mentioned to me that they received letters home from their schools about 13 Reasons Why.
Wow.
And some of them they were discouraging parents from allowing their children to watch it. So that's interesting. I haven't heard about that happening locally yet, and I don't know that they will make that choice, but I have seen that some schools in certain parts of the country, this is a big enough issue that the schools are actually addressing it by sending letters home, which is interesting.
And it does have impact, especially when it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that this has been helpful, and thank you, Jeff, for sharing your expertise with us. We look forward to doing more of this. Again, please reach out to us on our Facebook page if you have suggestions of other topics that you would like to hear Jeff or some of our other professionals here discuss. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.